Now, since the shocking tragedy at Grenfell Tower in 2017, buildings with a particular form of exterior cladding have become notorious. And over the following years, as attention turned to replacing that cladding, a battle broke out over who should actually pay for it, with some residents told that they would need to shoulder life-changingly high bills.
But much to their relief, a couple of years ago came a breakthrough, which looked as though it would force developers or landlords to cough up instead, thus ending the nightmare for so many leaseholders. But as I'll be hearing shortly, despite that change in the law, for some, the nightmare isn't over. Since 2005, Darren Matthews has called this block of flats in Salford home.
The main purpose of the building when it was established was to give people a foot on the ladder. It was aimed directly at key workers, teachers, NHS personnel, frontline workers.
When we first met Darren in 2021, he'd begun to fall seriously out of love with his home because following the Grenfell fire tragedy in 2017, Darren's was one of over 1,000 blocks across the UK which needed serious remedial work to remove flammable cladding and improve fire safety. And the enormous bill would have to be shouldered by the homeowners themselves.
I was quite taken back at the scale of repair, and the charge was actually £97,000 per apartment. It made me think, how am I going to find that money?
But there was hope on the horizon, in the form of the government's multi-billion-pound Building Safety Fund, which was designed to ensure that leaseholders didn't have to foot such life-changing bills. But there was one fatal flaw with it. Darren's building was too small.
The specification for claiming under that fund was for buildings over 18 metres would be eligible. This development is 13.5 metres tall, so we don't qualify for any government funding.
The leaseholders were stuck, unable to afford the repair bills and unable to sell their homes because at the time some lenders were refusing to offer mortgages on this type of property until the cladding had been replaced.
It's impacted on how I live during the day, it impacts on my working life, it impacts on my family time, it impacts on my social life, it impacts on my sleeping pattern, and it affects my general health and well-being.
At the time, the freeholder, Irwell Valley Homes, told us that it was still carrying out safety investigations, exploring the best way forward and continuing to push for more support for leaseholders affected in what it accepted was an extremely difficult situation. But that left Darren in limbo, with no idea if he'd ultimately have to find a massive £97,000 to make his home safe.
I don't have control over my future because of the uncertainty, because of the lack of answers. If I was going to use one word to define it, I would just say it's bleak.
Well, 6 months after we first met Darren, the government's Building Safety Act was introduced, which protected leaseholders from having to pay to put right historic safety defects and shifted the onus onto the building's owners and landlords. Unfortunately, though, it's not been the welcome relief that countless leaseholders like Darren need. He's joining me in HQ along with Giles Grover from the campaign group the Manchester Cladiators to reveal the latest twist that he and his neighbours are now confronted with. Welcome to you both. Darren, the introduction of the Building Safety Act should mean that the landlord or the building owner is now footing that bill, but that's not what's happening, is it?
Definitely not what's happening. Initially, the freeholder, owner of the building, said that the cladding needed to come off. What was behind the cladding would be repaired, missing fire breaks, compartmentalisation issues would be put right and a new cladding system installed. Now they're saying that it doesn't have to come off.
I mean, one of the things that seems so peculiar, and you could be forgiven for thinking that it's not, shall we say, very logical, is that when it was your responsibility, that'll be £100,000, please, but when it's theirs, more or less nothing needs to be done. I mean, where does this leave you?
It leaves us in the same position that we were in before. We feel that We are in a position where we can't move on. The impact on my health has been absolutely catastrophic. In December 22, I was hospitalised. I had a stroke as a result, in my mind, of the stress that we are under at the moment and ongoing. It impacts on my sleep, it impacts on my capability in work, it impacts on my social life and family relationships.
I mean, when you wake up in the morning, do you have to suddenly think, my God, I'm still in this building?
Yeah. You don't go on holiday because it's still on your mind. You're worried whether your property is safe and whether it's still going to be there when you get back.
Well, I think we can all totally understand and sympathise with that, you know, living in a building that you can't be certain is 100% safe must be a terrible pressure. So, Giles, I'd like to come to you at this point. The Manchester Cladiators have been campaigning for 5 years now, I gather, calling on the government to fix the cladding and building safety crisis. How common is this situation?
It's all too common, I'm afraid. It's happening up and down the country. We have seen some positive movement in the last 2 or 3 years with the law having changed, some leaseholders now being protected. However, this whole idea of proportionality means that the bar is effectively lowered to say, as long as you can get out the building, as long as you can escape within 10 minutes, then don't worry, that should be sufficient. So we just feel that alarms aren't going to be good enough. You need to get the building fully safe so people can be safe and actually move on with their lives. We're very concerned that it's essentially just another way for the government, developers, freeholders, everyone to diminish the scale of the building safety crisis. Ultimately, I'm afraid to say that leaseholders across the country are still being ripped off and there's not enough being done to stop that happening.
Can leaseholders appeal against these decisions? And, I mean, is there any kind of way that developers or landlords can actually be ordered to put it right?
It's all so complicated and depends upon the individual situation. The government, 2 years ago, they said there'll be an independent dispute resolution process. That's nowhere to be seen right now. They might, you know, behind the scenes try and help me mediate, but we're not seeing that visibly. All the government's now saying is, oh, the local regulators will do it. The building safety regulator will do something, but there's just no grip, there's just no oversight, and leaseholders are still trapped.
Well, Darren, thank you so much for coming in and talking about it so movingly and so expressively, and also to you too for explaining the background to it all. Well, when we spoke to Irwell Valley Homes, the freeholder for Darren's building, it told us that the safety of residents is its top priority and that since the new guidelines were introduced, it has conducted comprehensive independent risk assessments, which concluded that a sprinkler system, enhanced fire alarm and other measures would bring the risk below a tolerable level. Irwell Valley Homes says it's introduced new fire checks and will complete further works as soon as possible, adding that Manchester Fire Service supports its approach. Meanwhile, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities told us that building owners must meet their obligations to fix the safety defects, and in some cases, they can access government support. If remediation is not progressing, local authorities, fire and rescue services can compel building owners to fix their unsafe buildings.